First of all, they are being taught determinism, meaning that you are not really responsible for your ideas, your actions, your behavior, or their consequences. You are programmed, either by nature or by the culture, to behave in certain predetermined ways. You have no control over your future. You do not own your destiny. And this can cause people to lose confidence in their own ability and lose their spirit for freedom and for living life productively and with meaning and purpose. Creates wealth, wealth creates demand, supply lowers prices, markets create information, markets reward efficiency, efficiency creates profit, profit attracts capital, capital finds talent, talent obeys reality. Hello, and thank you for joining the Moneyball Method podcast. My name is Mark Shupe. I am the author of the Moneyball Method, a Middle-Class Manifesto for objective investing. And what I'd like to do today is continue our conversation about the abundance agenda. And in particular, my analysis of the book titled Abundance by Ezra, Klein, and Thompson. As you may recall from last week's podcast, I summarized the abundance agenda using a quote from American Thinker magazine, and I'd like to refresh your memory by reading that quote one more time. This is from August 23rd of this year. In short, the abundance agenda is the notion that government can and should do more vis-a-vis public and private building projects, both home and infrastructure building, especially green projects. But in order to do that, the cumbersome leviathan of federal regulations needs to be pared down considerably. And that's where the trouble starts. Bright blue progressives don't like that part. And as I mentioned toward the end of the last podcast, there are 4 questions that I would answer for you this time around. And they have to do with: what is the cause of homelessness? What is the cause of the housing supply shortage? What is the cost of the high cost of housing? And what is the solution? Naturally, these are very complex problems, and we can't address every issue involved in such a short conversation, but I'll do my best in the context of the book Abundance that I referred to earlier. Also, in the last podcast, I suggested that the solutions are related to independence, meaning your independence, meaning your ethical independence, which then becomes our own political independence. In other words, the solutions lie with economic freedom, political liberty, and the power of ideas. Regarding the first question, what is the cause of homelessness? I'd like to start with chapter 1 from Abundance, the book, and quote the authors. But the cause of homelessness isn't the poverty or the addiction or the unemployment. What I've discovered reading and analyzing this book is that if you want to know what the solutions are, do the opposite of what these authors are suggesting. If they are telling you that the cause of homelessness is not addiction or poverty or unemployment, you know that the cause of homelessness is addiction, poverty, and unemployment. Regarding the homeless question, I'd like to now go to chapter 2 of the book. The climate crisis demands something different. It demands liberalism that builds. What matters is not what gets spent, it's what gets built. What matters is not what gets spent. In other words, money is no object. In other words, the authors of the book have no concept of the source of wealth, the nature of money, or the virtues that are necessary for wealth to be created in the first place. To them, money is an unlimited resource. There is no scarcity. And if you're a proponent of the progressive regulatory bureaucratic state, that is the mindset. To look at the homeless problem in another context, let's go to chapter 3. Shouldn't things happen faster if they are backed by the might and money of the government? The money of the government? Governments do not create wealth. Governments produce nothing. Governments do not exist except to defend rights and enforce contracts. But since when do things happen faster under the force of government? And what matters is what gets built. Well, according to whom? Who decides what gets built? Some central committee or individuals with political liberty and economic freedom who are pursuing their own rational self-interest? So really, what is the true cause of homelessness? Well, again, this is a complex problem that will take a lot of time to answer, but I would suggest it begins with progressive government, the bureaucratic state, and in particular, government-mandated progressive schools. What are our children being taught by the government indoctrination factories? And in many cases, private education indoctrination factories. First of all, they are being taught determinism, meaning that you are not really responsible for your ideas, your actions, your behavior, or their consequences. You are programmed either by nature or by the culture to behave in certain predetermined ways. You have no control over your future. You do not own your destiny. And this can cause people to lose confidence in their own ability and lose their spirit for freedom and for living life productively and with meaning and purpose. Another thing that we are taught is collectivism. Whether it's conservative or progressive, we're all in this together, right? We all belong to a tribe, whether that tribe is society, the nation, your family, your ethnic group, your religion. You owe a duty to others. That is collectivism. You do not necessarily own your life. So what if you were taught as a child that you are not necessarily responsible for your behavior? After all, nothing is certain, no one is perfect, and that you owe your life to a tribe? Does this not incentivize what was a popular phrase in the 60s? Turn on, tune out, and drop out. Another common theme within progressive public education is the oppressors versus the oppressed. You are either a member of an oppressed group or you are an oppressor. Either way, you are considered to be one of society's losers and to blame for all societal problems that only the force of government and their credentialed experts can fix for you. This is the malevolent universe premise. Life is one catastrophe of another. It is chaotic, and you need the help of higher authority. The last one is bigotry. That gets back to the oppressors versus the oppressed. You have, because of determinism, natural inclinations to treat other people poorly if they are different than you. All of this can lead to substance abuse. All of this can lead to a lack of self-esteem. I would suggest that perhaps one of the solutions to the homeless problem is to eliminate government-mandated schools. Let's go to the next question. What is the cause of the housing supply shortage? Chapter 1 of Klein and Thompson's books tells us this is a story, at least in part, of how the solutions of one generation created the problems of the next. Is that really true? Were there solutions imposed by government to problems in the past? Certainly, there have always been social problems. Certainly, there have always been economic disparities, depending on the level of economic freedom and political liberty. But were these really solutions, or were they just the expansion of the government leviathan, an increase in power and a reduction in individual rights? Chapter 2 says it is the government's job, after all, to balance society's many competing perspectives. They need to do more than turn a profit and satisfy shareholders. To balance society's competing perspectives. What if some of these perspectives are destructive? What if they are irrational? What if they are not practical? What if they are immoral? Should we really give equal weight to all ideas and balance those? No. But yet we live in a culture that does exactly that. And is it really the government's job to balance anything, particularly subjective perspectives that might be competing with each other? It is not. It is the role of government to protect individual rights, to enforce contracts, and to get out of the way. Chapter 3, neither side focuses on what scholars call state capacity, the ability of the state to achieve its goals. Here we get into either or, left or right, Republican or Democrat, progressive or conservative, as if those are the only two choices. And clearly, those are the only two choices posed by the authors in the book titled Abundance. But they are not the only two choices. Left and right have a lot more in common. In other words, the power of the state, just different priorities as to what the state should do and how it should do it. But neither one of them has leadership or constituents that can define the American founding principles of rights, liberty, and justice. I would argue that either side is a false dichotomy. And state capacity. According to the authors, state capacity is only limited by the amount of money that they spend, without regard to where wealth comes from or how it is created. There is no such thing as state capacity. The state, government bureaucrats, they do not have any skin in the game. They do not have any profit incentive. They only have one capacity, and that is to consume wealth. What is the Moneyball Method solution to the housing supply shortage? Like always, we have to understand the cause. What is the cause of the housing supply shortage? Well, in the year 2025, the cause of the housing supply shortage can be traced directly to the economic lockdowns of 2020 and 2021. Supply networks that took decades to create were paralyzed. They were fractured. In some cases, they were wrecked. Steel, lumber, plywood, the cost of these went through the roof, and so did the cost of labor. I know this because I was trying to build a small house on a small lake in central Kentucky, and I had to scrap the entire plan and start from scratch because the cost of plywood and steel was just too exorbitant. This happens to a lot of people. And because of the economic lockdowns, housing construction came to a halt. People that wanted to sell their home chose to take them off the market because they couldn't afford to buy another property. Prices had gone up, and on top of that, so did the cost of mortgage financing. Which brings us to the third question. What is the cause of the high cost of housing? In other words, mortgages and rent. Chapter 1 of Klein and Thompson's book tells us the difficulties of deprivation, meaning the feudal system of 200, 300 years ago, had been joined by the diseases of affluence. What are the diseases of affluence? Too much government, too much wealth to be confiscated through taxation, too much wealth to be destroyed through regulation. That is the only disease of affluence that really matters in this case. Chapter 2, either we build faster or we accept catastrophe. Here they are setting up the chaos and catastrophe environment that they want to create in order to justify more government power, more government spending to grow government. Like in the last podcast, I asked the question on chapter 1 titled Grow, what is it that they really want to grow? It is not the housing supply, I can assure you. It is not to cure homelessness. That is the red herring. That is the decoy. It is to grow government. Chapter 3 says the public has an interest in fostering a strong and vibrant network of small and very small micro businesses. It does. Who is the public? I would argue that small and micro businesses are extremely important. They only flourish, they only manifest themselves in an environment of political liberty and economic freedom. So what is the solution to the homeless problem, the housing crisis, the cost of rent and mortgages, which is financial? The solution was repeated in my book, The Moneyball Method, and in my Substack articles that analyze abundance by Ezra, Klein, and Derek Thompson. It says, and it bears repeating, economics is about cause and effect. Production creates wealth, wealth creates demand, supply lowers prices, markets create information, markets reward efficiency, efficiency creates profit, profit attracts capital, capital finds talent, talent obeys reality. What is the solution to homelessness, or the housing supply shortage, or the cost of rents and mortgages? It is economic and political freedom. And with that, I'd like to conclude and look forward to joining you next week for the third of 4 podcasts related to the book Abundance by Ezra, Klein, and Derek Thompson. Thank you.